According to the United Nations, India will become the most populous country in the world in 2023. Can you guess where the United States of America ranks in this ranking? Third, and in terms of size, America ranks fourth. It occupies about 6% of the Earth's land area. That's enough room for the 335 million people who live there, right? There is no need to crowd into one region. Well, not exactly. The population of the United States is quite unevenly distributed. Let's draw a line right through the middle of the country. It will run from North Dakota in the north to Texas in the south. After you enter the census data and do some math, astounding numbers will appear. 80% of the U.S. population lives east of the imaginary line. The remaining 20% live in the west. That's only 1 in 5 Americans. We are talking about large metropolitan areas such as Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. Don't believe me? Just look at a satellite map of the United States at night. The right side, the East Coast, glows pretty brightly, right? But why? Why is there such a huge imbalance in the population? It's all about history and geography. The East Coast is where the United States gained independence in 1776. These are the first 13 colonies. Soon, the settlers began to spread westward. One of the important milestones was the Louisiana Purchase. Today, the region is mostly what we call the Midwest and fits well into the Mississippi watershed. This means that there is a lot of fertile soil that is ideal for farming. But does this mean an automatic surge in population? The demographic situation in the U.S. shows that the majority of citizens live on either the east or west coasts. As a result, a large plot of land in the center of the country remains virtually empty. People know it as a belt of sparsely populated areas of America. This territory stretches from the Canadian border in the north to Mexico in the south. The total area of this strip of land is 900,000 square kilometers. That's twice the size of California. A huge piece of land. In fact, this narrow strip makes up 12% of the entire territory of the United States. This is the U.S. without Alaska and Hawaii. The belt runs from north to south through 7 states, but its population is only 1% of the total population of the United States. But this does not mean that the area is completely empty. It is still home to just over 3 million people. This is approximately the population of the island nation of Jamaica. But there is room for a much larger number of residents. Take Nigeria, West Africa. Its total area is slightly larger than the sparsely populated belt in America. But Nigeria's population is a whopping 206 million. This makes it the 7th most populous country on the planet. Impressive, right? But why isn't America's Midwest realizing its potential? It's time for one last history lesson. We have already discussed that the United States expanded from the East Coast to the West Coast. But this does not mean that the West has lagged far behind. Take the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles, for example. They were registered in 1850. Just 13 years after Chicago. The following year, Portland, Oregon was incorporated. Well, you get the idea. And in 1869, the United States completed its first transcontinental railroad. In terms of transport, the country was united. There is no good enough historical reason to explain why so few people live in the center of the country. It's time to learn some interesting geography. If you look at a physical map of the United States, you'll notice that this belt lies on the Great Plains. As the name suggests, the terrain here is flat, which should be ideal for large settlements. But in reality, this is not the case. To the east of this region is a huge patch of brown. It is covered with mountains, but not just any mountains. These are Rocky Mountains. The age of the mountain range is about 76 million years. It has several peaks with a height of 4,200 meters. And most of the Rocky Mountains are national parks, a huge nature reserve. But the most important thing is that the ridge plays an important role in shaping the climate of the region. Have you ever heard of the rain-shadow effect? Let me explain. Wet weather systems form over the Pacific Ocean. They then move east, where they encounter Rocky Mountains. The air has to rise above the mountains. There it cools and condenses. And what is the result? A lot of rain, snow for people living to the west and east of the mountain range, and just a few drops to the east of it. When the air from the Pacific Ocean finally reaches the Great Plains, it no longer contains much moisture. Essentially, the weather system begins to take moisture from the surrounding landscape. This creates an arid climate to the east of the Rocky Mountains. It is in this belt that so few Americans live. It is one of the driest parts of the country. So when settlers came here in the 19th century, they just continued west. In addition, there was a gold rush in California that they were striving for. The climate in this part of the plains is not very suitable for agriculture, and huge differences in air temperature do not contribute to this either. In one day, the temperature can drop from 20 to -1 degree. Such sudden changes in temperature are harmful to human health. It's like walking into an air-conditioned room on a hot summer day. Not the most pleasant feeling. Southern California has the same dry climate. However, about 40 million people live there. This makes California the most populous state in the United States. What's her secret? A huge network of irrigation canals and aqueducts, as well as a share of water from the Colorado River. Summers in the Great Plains can be very hot and winters are very cold. The reason for such wild weather conditions is polar winds. They sweep along the ridge of the Rocky Mountains and then quickly descend to the plains. A winter day in Wyoming, for example, can start pleasantly warm, but later in the afternoon, temperatures can easily drop below freezing. You just won't know how to dress. And, most likely, you will not want to move here. 99% of Americans think so. Humans like to feel comfortable, so we prefer to live in temperate climate zones. Places that are either too cold or too hot don't have a large population. Just look at the driest inhabited continent. You guessed it right. This is Australia. Almost 70% of the country's territory is arid or semi-arid. Such a subtle way of saying it's a desert. That is why Australians huddle in coastal areas. 90% of them live in major cities such as Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The only exception is the capital, Canberra. It was built in the interior of the country next to a water source. But the interior of Australia is sparsely populated, just like the States. In an area the size of 12 lakes in Michigan, there is only one major city. Hello, Alice Springs residents. They really live in the oasis. What about temperate places like Europe? After all, the population here is evenly distributed. Yes and no, depending on the country. In Germany, 77% of people live in cities. They have many major cities to choose from. More than 1 million people live in Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Cologne. But let's look at neighboring France. How many cities with a population of more than 1 million can you name? Paris, of course. It is home to more than 12 million people. But now for a staggering fact. The next two cities on the list, Lyon and Marseille, have populations of barely 2 million, respectively. Notice a huge imbalance? This is the case in most major European countries. In Greece, for example, 35% of the population lives in the capital city of Athens. Thus, the sparsely populated center of the United States is not a unique example. America is a land of opportunity, but the chances of finding a better life are higher in the big cities. The country's 100 largest metropolitan areas account for at least 3/4 of GDP, the gross domestic product, and most of them are located on the east and west coasts. In America's sparsely populated belt, there is not a single city with a population of more than 1 million people.